Live from London, this is the Iran War Today on BBC News. Over the next 10 or 15 minutes, we will bring you all the key updates on day 34 of the war. Well, let's start now with today's main developments. Foreign ministers from more than 40 countries meet to discuss a plan to reopen the vital Strait of Hormuz oil route. Stocks tumble and oil prices jump after Donald Trump's threat to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. The US and Israel continue to hit targets inside Iran. This footage shows a series of explosions at a missile base near Esfahan. Iran says the impact of the US-Israeli attacks has been insignificant and warns of a crushing response to Donald Trump's threat to take the country back to the Stone Ages. We begin with a question that's been driving fuel prices up and weighing on the minds of politicians since the early days of the war: how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The strait is a vital shipping route in the Middle East, but it's been effectively blockaded by Iran. With hundreds of ships stranded on either side of the strait, oil, gas and diesel prices have risen sharply, leading Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper to condemn Iran for hitting global economic security. She said there's an urgent need to restore freedom of navigation through the strait.
In the last 24 hours, it says 25 vessels passed through the strait, which is an international shipping route that would normally see 150 vessels a day. There have been over 25 attacks on vessels in the strait, and there are some 20,000 trapped seafarers on some 2,000 trapped ships.
Yvette Cooper was speaking at a virtual meeting of more than 40 foreign ministers less than 24 hours after Donald Trump said securing the vital passage was a problem for other nations to resolve.
The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it. They can do it easily. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on.
Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is here. And James, bring us up to date. Has there been any agreement at that meeting of foreign ministers?
I think this was the start of a conversation rather than a meeting designed to actually agree things. Essentially what they're doing here is not talking about military options, trying to force some kind of the opening of the strait using military means, because most people agree that's just simply not operable. What they're talking about is what can they do now, diplomatically and economically, and what can they do as and when the fighting ends. In terms of what they can do now, can they put more political pressure on Iran? They're talking about sanctions, they're talking about UN resolutions. Can they put more economic pressure with sanctions? But they're also saying, what can they do to help the 20,000 odd merchant sailors who are trapped on ships the wrong side of this strait, not only because of their own discomfort, but also because of risk for their cargoes. Some of their cargoes are volatile. You don't want that falling out of ships. But then there's also the question of what you do as and when the fighting stops. How do you get some kind of maritime structure that could allow shipping to pass safely? What do you have to do on insurance? What do you have to do on reassuring both sides? Do you need to have some new contract or deal or arrangement involving both the Omanis and the Iranians? It's that kind of conversation that they want to start now, as and when they're ready for when the fighting ends.
We heard there from President Trump. He's clear that he thinks allies should sort the Strait of Hormuz out themselves. But can they do it without the US?
Well, look, there was no US representation at today's meeting. And I think part of today's meeting was sort of an attempt to pacify the Trump administration and say, look, you say, can you do something? Can you take more ownership of this issue? We are doing a little bit. We're having these meetings. We are having these discussions. The problem is that although the United States says they don't care so much because less of their oil passes through that strait, the Americans do care about the price of oil. They do care about the state of international markets, and that is not going to be resolved until that strait remains open. The key question is going to be this. The Iranians are thinking about setting up a system of charging shipping to go through, to transit. That was firmly opposed at today's meeting, and at some point, that's going to be a crunch.
OK, James, thank you. Well, oil prices surged and markets sank hours after President Trump declared in that prime-time TV address that the US will set up its military campaign, stepping it up against Iran. Well, the continuing uncertainty over the direction and duration of the war is keeping oil and gas prices at levels not seen since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago. Well, let's speak now to our business correspondent, Esirt Kar. Esirt, what's happening to oil prices now?
Well, Mariam, after President Trump's address, the oil price rose by around 8%, and we saw the price of Brent crude rise to around $108 a barrel. And they've stayed there or thereabouts today. It clearly wasn't the kind of detail that some were anticipating about how and when the conflict was going to end. Now, President Trump did say that he thought that oil and gas would start flowing again very quickly, naturally, when the war came to an end. But some analysts are sceptical about that. They think it will take time for this trade to recover, particularly when you think about the kind of damage to the energy infrastructure in the Gulf that we've seen over the last few weeks. Now, oil prices have gone up more than 50% since this conflict began, and that's already having a huge impact all around the world, with things like higher petrol and diesel prices and feeding into extra costs and complexity in global supply chains.
We've also seen a shortage of jet fuel, haven't we? Is it hurting the aviation industry, as some have suggested?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, jet fuel has doubled in price, and given that it makes up around 25% of most airlines' operating costs, that's clearly having a significant impact, especially in Asian countries where they're very reliant on fuel from the Gulf. Now, today, Air China, along with some other Chinese airlines, became the latest to raise fuel surcharges in response. They kick in from Sunday on domestic flights, and lots of other airlines have put in measures too. Korean Air went into a sort of emergency management mode a few days ago, and Vietnam Air are also cutting back on their flights. Now, in other parts of the world, they do get jet fuel from the US, from the Netherlands, from India, but that demand, the competition for what's available, means that prices are going up everywhere, and we're seeing lots of airlines taking action. Some are saying they're going to be putting up ticket prices, like Air France and Air New Zealand. Others are cutting back on routes, on their services, and some are even finding other ways to try and cover those additional costs. The US airline JetBlue says it's going to raise baggage costs, for example. Now, of course, some airlines, many airlines, they buy their jet fuel way in advance to protect themselves from this kind of volatility. So for some, the impact isn't going to be immediate, but even some of those, like EasyJet, are warning customers that they could see prices going up at the end of the summer.
Eshel, thank you very much. Now, let's turn to the current state of play on the battlefield. The US and Israel have continued to strike Iranian targets, with Donald Trump saying last night the US would hit Iran extremely hard in the coming weeks. Well, these are verified pictures showing huge explosions near a major Iranian missile base on the outskirts of Esfahan. If you watch closely, you can see a series of secondary blasts. This suggests other explosive material detonating following a US or Israeli strike. Well, despite being under constant bombardment for just over a month now, Iran is claiming the US-Israeli strikes have been insignificant, and it's threatening to crush retaliation. Well, to discuss all these developments with me now is our special correspondent for BBC Persian, Kasra Naji. And Kasra, let's start with that remark by President Trump threatening to take Iran back to the Stone Ages. How has that gone down with Iranians inside the country, do we know?
A lot of concern on the parts of Iranians, both inside Iran and outside Iran. And these are targets that many people regard as civilian targets that have been hit. Like today, we had right in the center of Tehran, in the old part of Tehran, Institut Pasteur, which is an institute for producing vaccines in Iran and medical sort of research. That was hit. And this is a very old, a century-old institute that was established in collaboration with France at the time, the French government. And obviously, I cannot think that this particular target was particularly had any military significance. We also had today a bridge that was hit in the west of Tehran on the way. There's a very high bridge that was supposed to come on stream any day now, and it connects Tehran via a very scenic route to the Caspian Sea. And that bridge has been hit, which is concerning to many Iranians. And also yesterday we had Iran's biggest steel mill attack. And this was a biggest industrial unit in Iran, supplying steel to 60% of needs in the Middle East and North Africa. Very big industrial unit that is out of action today. And don't forget, in the last hour, we had a message from President Trump on Truth Social. I read it to you. It says, the biggest bridge in Iran comes tumbling down, never to be used again. And he says, much more to follow. It is time for Iran to make a deal before it is too late and there's nothing left. Don't forget, President Trump, only 2 months ago, was calling on Iranians to stay put. Help is on its way. And this doesn't sort of gel with a lot of people in Iran.
There's no signs of the Iranian military running out of missiles and drones to fight the war, is there, despite Americans saying that they've destroyed the majority of those?
Well, for the moment, we don't see any sign of that, although they're using fewer missiles at any given time or any given day, for example, against Israel. But nevertheless, these attacks are continuing, drone attacks are continuing, hitting targets in the Middle East, in the region around Iran. So it seems that for the moment, both sides seem to be sort of determined to carry on and press on.
OK, Kassra, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thanks for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.